The nurse spoke softly, almost apologetically. "Mrs. Calloway, your husband is asking for an update. He is on the phone at the nurse's station." Margaret turned her head on the pillow, her body still trembling from 23 hours of labor that had ended not in celebration but in urgent whispers and the squeak of wheels rushing her daughter away to a place she could not follow. "He is not here." The words came out as a statement, not a question. She already knew the answer but needed to hear it confirmed, needed the truth to exist outside the fog of exhaustion and fear that had settled over her like a second skin. The nurse hesitated, her expression carefully neutral in the way hospital staff learned to perfect. "He said his flight from Geneva was delayed by weather. He sounds very concerned." Geneva. Margaret closed her eyes. He had told her it was Berlin. A business conference that could not be rescheduled. A deal that required his personal attention. The kind of excuse she had heard so many times over the years that the words had lost all meaning. "Tell him the baby has a heart defect." Her voice remained steady despite the words that wanted to crack apart in her throat. "Tell him they have taken her to surgery. Tell him I will call when I know something." The nurse lingered in the doorway. "Would you like me to stay with you until someone arrives?" Margaret looked at the empty chair beside her bed. It was a standard hospital chair, uncomfortable and institutional, the kind designed for short visits rather than long vigils. She had imagined that chair occupied so many times during her pregnancy. She had pictured her husband sitting there, holding her hand through contractions, counting breaths with her, weeping with relief when their daughter finally entered the world. Now it held only her overnight bag, packed 3 weeks ago when her due date was still a comfortable distance away, brought to the hospital not by her husband but by the neighbor who had heard her calling for help when her water broke and her phone calls went unanswered. "No." Margaret pulled her gaze away from the chair. "Thank you. I would like to be alone." Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. This was not, Margaret understood as the nurse retreated and the door clicked softly shut, how the story was supposed to go. For 9 years, she had been the wife of Raymond Calloway, founder and CEO of Calloway Ventures, a private equity firm whose acquisitions made headlines in the financial pages and whose annual charity gala raised more money for children's hospitals than any other single event in the state. Margaret had learned to navigate that world with grace, had become fluent in its particular language of understated wealth and carefully cultivated connections. She had been gracious at dinner parties and invisible at board meetings, supportive during crises and silent during triumphs that belonged to her husband alone. Raymond lived in 2 worlds, and she had always admired him for it. By day, he commanded boardrooms and negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His name appeared regularly in financial publications, his opinion sought by analysts and executives alike. At 43, he had built an empire that most men could only dream of. But on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, he became someone else entirely. Ray, the volunteers called him. Just Ray, in his simple scrubs and comfortable shoes, spending 4 hours at a time in the pediatric cardiac unit of St. Andrew's Children's Hospital, reading to sick children, holding the hands of frightened parents, sitting with families during the longest nights of their lives. He had been doing it for almost 20 years, since before he made his first million, since before anyone knew his name. It was the part of him that Margaret had fallen in love with first, this man who understood suffering and chose to sit with it rather than look away. What few people knew, what Raymond rarely spoke about even to her, was why he did it. His younger brother Daniel had been born with a congenital heart defect. Tetralogy of Fallot, the doctors had called it, a combination of 4 separate problems that affected how blood flowed through his tiny heart. Raymond had been 14 when Daniel was born, old enough to understand what the diagnosis meant, old enough to sit in hospital waiting rooms during surgeries, old enough to watch his parents age years in the space of months. Daniel had survived his first surgery. And his second. He had come home and learned to walk and started preschool and become the center of Raymond's entire world. For 3 years, it had seemed like everything would be okay. And then it was not. A complication during what should have been a routine procedure. A series of cascading failures that the doctors could not stop. Daniel died 3 days after his 4th birthday, in the same pediatric cardiac unit where Raymond now volunteered, in the same hospital where Margaret was currently lying alone with her own daughter fighting for her life. She had always believed that Raymond's dedication to those sick children was the best part of him. The proof that beneath the ambition and the drive and the relentless pursuit of success, there was a man who understood what really mattered. Now, lying in this hospital bed at 3:47 in the morning with her daughter's life hanging in the balance, she was no longer sure what she believed. 4 hours later, a doctor appeared in her doorway. She was a tall woman with graying locks pulled back from a face that carried both authority and compassion in equal measure. Her scrubs still bore the faint traces of the operating room. When she saw Margaret struggling to sit up, she moved quickly to help. "Please, do not strain yourself. You have been through a great deal. I am Dr. Amara Okonkwo. I performed your daughter's surgery." Margaret pushed herself upright despite the pain. She needed to be sitting for this. She needed to face whatever was coming as something other than a woman lying down. "Please, tell me everything." Dr. Okonkwo settled into the empty chair with the ease of someone who had delivered difficult news many times and understood the importance of being at eye level with the person receiving it. "Your daughter was born with a condition called tetralogy of Fallot." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She knew that name. She had heard Raymond speak it in the quiet hours of the night when he shared stories about Daniel, about the brother he had lost, about the grief that had shaped his entire adult life. It is a combination of 4 heart defects that affect the structure of the heart and how blood flows through it. Dr. Okonkwo continued, not noticing the way Margaret's face had gone pale. "We performed an emergency procedure to stabilize her, and I am pleased to tell you that she came through it well. She has the same condition." Margaret heard herself say, "The same condition as." She could not finish the sentence. Dr. Okonkwo looked at her with concern. "Mrs. Calloway, is there something I should know? Some family history?" "My husband's brother." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "He died from this when he was 4 years old." Dr. Okonkwo's expression shifted, something softening in her professional demeanor. "I am so sorry. That must make this especially difficult for your family. But I want to assure you that treatment has advanced significantly in the past decades. The surgery we performed tonight was a temporary measure, what we call a palliative procedure. It allows blood to flow more effectively to her lungs while she grows stronger. She will need a complete repair surgery in approximately 6 to 8 weeks. And the survival rates. For infants with this condition who receive proper surgical intervention, we see survival rates in the 95% range. Your daughter is small, having arrived early, but she is a fighter. Her vital signs have been strong throughout." Margaret nodded slowly, trying to absorb the information through the fog of exhaustion and fear. The same condition that killed Daniel. The same surgery, decades later, with decades of advancement and improvement. It felt like fate playing a cruel joke, or perhaps offering a chance at redemption. "When can I see her?" "She is in our cardiac intensive care unit being closely monitored. Once you are cleared by your own medical team, we will bring you to her." Dr. Okonkwo paused, her gaze taking in the empty room, the untouched flowers on the windowsill that must have been sent by someone who had not bothered to deliver them in person, the absence of anyone else. "Is there someone we can call for you?" "The father. He is traveling," Margaret said automatically. "I will update him when I know more." Dr. Okonkwo nodded, but something in her expression suggested recognition. Not of the name Calloway, which would have meant nothing to most doctors, but of something else. "Your husband. He would not happen to be Raymond Calloway, the volunteer on the cardiac unit." Margaret stared at her. "You know him. Everyone on this floor knows Ray." Dr. Okonkwo's voice carried warmth that seemed at odds with the current situation. "He has been volunteering here for almost 20 years. Some of the nurses have known him since before he was successful. He is wonderful with the children and the families. Very dedicated." The words settled over Margaret like a weight she could not escape. Very dedicated. To other people's children. To other people's families. To Tuesday and Thursday evenings spent at bedsides that were not hers. "Yes," she said finally. "He is very dedicated." After the doctor left, Margaret reached for her phone. 12 missed calls from the past 8 hours, all from Raymond's office number rather than his personal cell. His assistant trying to reach her on his behalf. Never Raymond himself. She dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he answered. Margaret. Finally. His voice carried the particular weariness of international travel, or perhaps of a man interrupted from something he did not want to be interrupted from. I have been trying to reach you for hours. What is happening? Is the baby here? She is out of surgery. The silence on the other end was absolute. Margaret could hear him processing the word surgery, could almost feel him connecting the dots to the brother he had lost, to the condition he knew better than most. Surgery. His voice was different now, stripped of its usual confidence. What kind of surgery? What happened? She has tetralogy of Fallot. The sharp intake of breath that came through the phone was the most genuine emotion she had heard from him in months. No. He whispered. That is not possible. That is. She is stable. Margaret cut him off, unable to bear the sound of his pain when she was drowning in her own. The initial repair was successful. They say she will need a second procedure in 6 to 8 weeks. I am coming home. I am leaving right now. In the background, Margaret heard something that did not quite match the urgency of his words. Soft music, muted but present. The clink of glasses. An ambient quality that suggested a restaurant or hotel bar rather than an airport or business hotel room. Where are you? She asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know. I am at the hotel. About to head to the airport. I will be there as soon as I can. Geneva or Berlin. The pause that followed was a fraction of a second too long. Geneva. The conference ended early. I thought you said it was in Berlin. Another pause. Did I? I have been traveling so much, I must have mixed up the cities. Margaret, I need to go so I can arrange the flight. I will call you from the air. She ended the conversation before he could say more. Before she could hear more sounds that contradicted his words. Before she could allow herself to feel anything beyond the numb determination that had settled into her bones. There would be time later for everything else. Right now, her daughter was waiting. The neonatal intensive care unit existed in its own universe, separate from the ordinary rhythms of the hospital around it. Soft lighting and muted colors filled the space. The constant hum of machines provided a backdrop to hushed conversations. Margaret was wheeled in by an orderly, her body still too weak from surgery to walk, but she barely noticed the indignity of the wheelchair. All of her attention was fixed on the small plastic incubator at the center of the room. She is right here. The NICU nurse, a kind-faced woman whose name tag read Helen, positioned Margaret's wheelchair beside the incubator. You can touch her if you want to. Just slide your hand through the porthole. Let her know you are here. Margaret reached through the circular opening, her fingers trembling as they made contact with skin so soft it seemed impossible. Her daughter was impossibly small, barely 5 pounds, with wires and tubes connected to monitoring equipment that beeped in steady rhythm. Hello, sweetheart. Margaret's voice cracked on the words. I am here. I am right here and I am not going anywhere. The baby's eyes fluttered but did not open. Her tiny hand curled reflexively around Margaret's finger with a grip that seemed far stronger than her size should have allowed. She knows you. Helen said softly. They always know their mothers. Helen moved around the incubator, checking monitors and adjusting settings with practiced efficiency. After a moment, she glanced at Margaret with a look that suggested she wanted to say something but was uncertain whether she should. Mrs. Calloway, I hope you do not mind me mentioning, but I know your husband. Ray has been volunteering here since before I started, and I have been on this unit for 18 years. Margaret looked up, unsure what to say. He talks about you sometimes. Helen continued. When we have slow nights and the families have gone home. He says you are the best thing that ever happened to him. That he would not be where he is today without you. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like salt in an open wound. That is kind of him to say. Helen seemed to sense the tension beneath Margaret's measured response. She busied herself with Clara's monitors for a moment before speaking again. I was surprised when I saw your name on the admission. I called Ray's cell to let him know you were here, but it went straight to voicemail. The nurses thought he would want to know. Margaret absorbed this information quietly. The nurses on her husband's volunteer unit had tried to reach him when his wife was admitted in crisis. He had not answered. He had been unreachable, somewhere that was not Berlin and might or might not have been Geneva, doing something he was not willing to name. I am sure he will be here soon, she said, because it was the only thing she could say. Helen nodded, but her eyes held questions she was too professional to ask. Margaret stayed beside the incubator until her own medical team insisted she return to her room. Even then, she made them promise to call her the moment anything changed. She was learning the rhythms of this new world, the world of a mother whose child needed machines to survive. 11 minutes. That was how long they let her hold her daughter before the second surgery, 6 weeks later. In those 6 weeks, Margaret had learned things no mother should have to learn so quickly. She had become fluent in the language of cardiac care, could read the monitors almost as well as the nurses, knew which alarms signaled genuine emergencies and which were routine fluctuations in a healing heart. She had also learned things about her marriage that she had been refusing to see for far too long. Raymond had arrived the day after Clara's birth, 14 hours after his daughter entered the world. He came with flowers and apologies and the particular charm that had built his career, explaining about weather delays and mechanical problems and all the obstacles that had kept him from her side. She had accepted his explanations because she was too exhausted to do otherwise. Because Clara needed all of her attention and energy. Because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. He held Clara awkwardly that first visit, uncomfortable with the wires and tubes in a way that surprised her given his years of volunteering with sick children. He checked his phone more than he checked the monitors. He stayed for 2 hours and then left, promising to return that evening. He did not return until the following afternoon. A pattern emerged over those 6 weeks, becoming clearer with each passing day. Raymond visited every 3 or 4 days, sometimes less. He brought gifts that accumulated on the windowsill, flowers and stuffed animals, and cards expressing sentiments that should have come from his own mouth rather than printed paper. He spoke with doctors and asked questions and nodded seriously at the answers, playing the role of concerned father with the same skill he brought to his business negotiations. And then his phone would ring. His expression would shift. He would excuse himself to the hallway, and Margaret would watch through the glass as his posture changed, as his voice dropped into registers she could not hear, as he became someone she did not recognize. He still volunteered at the hospital on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She knew because Helen mentioned it, casually, during one of their late-night conversations. He was here earlier. Helen said one Thursday, checking Clara's vitals. Spent 2 hours with the Morrison family. Their son is having his 3rd surgery next week. Ray sat with them and talked them through the whole process. Margaret nodded, saying nothing. Her husband had spent 2 hours with a stranger's family on the same day he had spent 45 minutes with his own. The irony was not lost on her. Raymond Calloway, beloved volunteer, dedicated advocate for sick children and frightened families, could not manage to be present for his own daughter's fight for life. He could hold the hands of other mothers, comfort other fathers, but he could not sit in the chair beside Margaret's bed for more than an hour at a time. She began to understand that his volunteer work was not evidence of his character, but rather an escape from it. An easier form of caring that demanded nothing from him but time. The Morrison family would not notice if his phone buzzed during a conversation. They would not recognize the particular way his voice changed when he spoke to whoever was on the other end. They would only see the successful man who gave so generously of his time, never knowing what he withheld from the woman he had married. 3 weeks after Clara's birth, Margaret found the photograph. She was scrolling through social media during one of the rare quiet moments, when Clara slept peacefully and there was nothing to research, nothing to monitor, nothing to do but exist in the liminal space between crises. Her finger moved automatically through images she barely saw. Then she stopped. A charity gala, the kind of event Raymond attended regularly as part of his public profile. The photograph was professionally taken, the lighting flattering, the setting unmistakably expensive. A fundraiser for children's cardiac research, according to the caption. The same cause Raymond championed through his volunteer work. He was in the background of the shot, not the focus but visible enough to recognize. He was smiling at someone outside the frame, his body angled toward whoever stood beside him. And on his arm, just barely visible at the edge of the photograph, was a woman's hand. Manicured nails. An elegant bracelet. Fingers resting on his sleeve with casual intimacy. The gala had taken place 3 nights ago. Raymond had told her he was in meetings that would run late. That he would try to stop by the hospital the following morning if he could manage it. He had not stopped by. He had texted instead, apologizing for the demands of a deal that was in its final stages, promising to make it up to her and Clara soon. Margaret saved the photograph to her phone. Then she locked the screen and set it aside and returned her attention to Clara, who was beginning to stir in her incubator. There would be time later for everything else. Right now, her daughter needed her. The night before Clara's surgery, Margaret called her mother. She had been protecting Ruth from the full weight of what was happening, sharing only the essential medical updates and insisting that everything was under control. But now, with the surgery 12 hours away and Raymond absent yet again, she could no longer carry the burden alone. "I need you to come," Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Clara's surgery is tomorrow, and I need you here." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment. "I will be there by morning," Ruth replied without hesitation. "Whatever you need, I will be there." After they hung up, Margaret sat in the dim light of the NICU, watching Clara sleep. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The night nurse made her quiet rounds. Somewhere in the hospital, in the cardiac unit where he had volunteered for 2 decades, Raymond was probably sitting with another family, being the man he could not seem to be for her. She thought about Daniel, the brother Raymond had lost. She thought about the grief that had shaped him, the dedication that had emerged from that loss. She had always believed his volunteer work was a way of honoring Daniel's memory, of making meaning from tragedy. Now she wondered if it was something else entirely. A way of staying close to pain without actually feeling it. A way of being present for suffering that demanded nothing from him but his time and his charm. When he sat with strangers, he could be the hero. He could offer comfort without accountability. He could leave when his shift ended and return to his own life, unburdened by the ongoing weight of someone else's crisis. But with her, with Clara, there was no escape. The crisis was his own. The pain was not something he could witness and then walk away from. And he did not know how to handle that, so he handled it by not being there at all. Ruth arrived at 6 in the morning, an hour before the surgical team was scheduled to prep Clara. Margaret met her in the hospital lobby, having left Clara in the capable hands of the day shift nurses for the first time since her daughter was born. The sight of her mother walking through the automatic doors, silver hair pulled back in its familiar knot, practical suitcase rolling behind her, broke something loose in Margaret's chest. "Oh, sweetheart." Ruth set down her suitcase and opened her arms. "You look exhausted." "I am fine." "You are not fine." Ruth pulled back, studying her daughter's face. "But that is all right. I am here now." They walked together to the NICU, where Ruth met her granddaughter for the first time. She stood beside the incubator in silence for a long moment, tears rolling down her cheeks, before reaching through the porthole to touch Clara's tiny hand. "She is beautiful," Ruth whispered. "She looks just like you did. The nurses say she is a fighter." "Of course she is." Ruth smiled through her tears. "She comes from strong women." Throughout the morning, as the surgical team prepared Clara for the operation, Ruth observed without comment. She watched the nurses move with practiced efficiency. She listened as doctors explained procedures and risks and recovery timelines. She noted the flowers wilting on the windowsill, the cards that had accumulated unopened, the chair beside Margaret's makeshift bed that showed no signs of regular occupation. And she waited. It was not until they were sitting in the surgical waiting room, Clara already wheeled away to the operating theater, that Ruth finally asked the question Margaret had been dreading. "Where is Raymond?" Margaret stared at the wall, at the generic artwork designed to soothe anxious families, at everything except her mother's knowing eyes. "He had meetings this morning. He said he would try to get here before the surgery started." Ruth checked her watch. "The surgery started 45 minutes ago." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. Other families moved through the waiting room, some arriving, some leaving, all carrying the particular weight of loved ones under the knife. Margaret watched them without really seeing them. Margaret. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. Talk to me. And so Margaret talked. The words poured out of her in a flood she could not control. Raymond's absences. The phone calls in the hallway. The business trips that did not quite add up. The photograph from the gala. The devastating irony of a man who could spend hours comforting strangers but could not manage to be present for his own family. Ruth listened without interrupting. When Margaret finally ran out of words, her mother was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? I did not want to know. Margaret admitted. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. That he was just stressed about work. That once Clara was born, things would be different. And now? Now she has been fighting for her life for 6 weeks. Now he has been here for maybe 50 hours total. Now he is somewhere that is not this waiting room while his daughter has her chest opened for the second time. Margaret's voice cracked. Now I cannot pretend anymore. Ruth took her daughter's hand and held it firmly. What are you going to do? I do not know. Right now, all I can think about is getting Clara through this surgery. After that, I will figure out the rest. They waited together as the hours passed. Ruth brought coffee that neither of them drank. She talked about nothing and everything, filling the silence with the comfortable rhythm of her voice. She did not push Margaret to make decisions or plans. She simply stayed, present and steady, a reminder that not everyone left when things got hard. In the third hour, Margaret's phone buzzed. A text message from Raymond. In meetings but thinking of you both. Update me when you can. She read it twice, then put her phone away without responding. In the fifth hour, Helen appeared in the waiting room doorway. Her expression was carefully controlled, giving nothing away. Mrs. Calloway. The surgery is going well. Dr. Okonkwo wanted me to let you know they are in the final stages of the repair. Another hour or two. Margaret nodded, relief washing through her. Thank you. Helen hesitated, glancing around the waiting room. Is Mr. Calloway not here? He had meetings. Helen's expression flickered, something complicated passing across her features. I see. After she left, Ruth turned to Margaret with a particular look she had perfected during 30 years of teaching, the one that saw straight through deflection and denial. Helen knows him well. He has been volunteering here for 20 years. All the nurses know him. And what do they think of him? They think he is wonderful. Margaret heard the bitterness in her own voice. Dedicated. Compassionate. Always there for the families who need him. Ruth absorbed this information in silence. She did not need to point out the contradiction. It hung in the air between them, obvious and damning. The 7th hour came and went. Margaret had stopped watching the clock, had stopped doing anything except sitting with her mother and waiting for news that would change everything or confirm what she already knew. When Dr. Okonkwo finally appeared in the doorway, still wearing her surgical cap, Margaret rose on legs that had forgotten how to be steady. Your daughter did beautifully. The words hit Margaret like a wave, washing away 7 hours of fear and tension. Ruth was crying beside her, gripping her arm, but Margaret could not cry. She was too full. Too overwhelmed by the simple, extraordinary fact that Clara was going to live. The repair is complete. Dr. Okonkwo continued. If the next 48 hours go smoothly, we can start discussing discharge. She is a remarkable fighter. When can I see her? About an hour. She is being settled in recovery. The nurse will come for you when she is ready. After the doctor left, Margaret stood frozen in the middle of the waiting room. Her daughter had survived. The surgery was over. The worst was behind them. And her husband had not been there for any of it. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Raymond. Just landed. Coming straight to the hospital. How is she? Margaret stared at the message for a long moment. He had been on a plane. While their daughter was in surgery. While Margaret sat in the waiting room for 7 hours. He had been traveling from wherever he had actually been to wherever he was supposed to be. She typed her response with steady fingers. Surgery is over. She is going to be fine. His reply came immediately. Thank God. I will be there within the hour. She did not respond. There was nothing left to say. Raymond arrived exactly 53 minutes later. He came through the NICU doors looking rumpled and exhausted, his suit wrinkled from travel, his hair disheveled in a way she rarely saw. He carried an enormous stuffed elephant under one arm and a bouquet of roses in the other. Margaret. He moved toward her immediately, setting down his offerings to pull her into an embrace. I am so sorry I was not here. The flight was delayed and then there was traffic and... She let him hold her without returning the embrace. His arms felt unfamiliar, foreign in a way they never had before. When he finally released her, she stepped back, putting space between them. She is in recovery, Margaret said. They say she is doing well. Can I see her? Of course. She is your daughter too. They walked together to Clara's recovery room, where Ruth was already sitting beside the bed. Raymond stopped in the doorway when he saw his mother-in-law, surprise flickering across his features. Ruth. I did not know you were coming. Ruth rose, meeting his eyes with a directness that made him take an involuntary step back. My daughter needed me, so I came. The implication was clear. Raymond's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I am glad you could be here. He moved to Clara's bedside, looking down at his daughter with an expression Margaret could not read. The baby was sleeping peacefully, her color better than it had been since birth. The monitors showed steady rhythms, strong signals, evidence of a heart that was finally learning to work properly. She looks good, Raymond said quietly. Stronger. She is stronger, Margaret replied. She has been fighting for her life for 6 weeks. The words landed between them with unmistakable weight. Raymond glanced at her, something flickering in his eyes. I know I should have been here more. Work has been. Please. Margaret held up her hand. Not right now. He fell silent, accepting the rebuke. For a long moment, they stood on opposite sides of their daughter's bed, the space between them filled with everything they were not saying. Ruth excused herself to find coffee, giving them privacy neither of them seemed to want. After she left, Raymond spoke again. Margaret, I know things have been difficult, but she is going to be okay now. We can put all of this behind us. Move forward. Move forward. Margaret repeated the words as though testing them. That is what you want. To move forward. I want us to be a family. He reached across Clara's bed, trying to take her hand. I want to be here for both of you. She pulled her hand away. Where were you today? During the surgery. I told you. I was on a flight. I came as soon as I could. And before the flight. Where were you then? His hesitation was less than a second, but it was enough. Meetings. The deal I have been working on. In Geneva. Yes. In Geneva. Margaret nodded slowly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With careful deliberation, she opened the photograph she had saved 3 weeks ago. The charity gala. His hand on another woman's arm. This was taken 3 weeks ago. At a gala in New York. You told me you were in meetings that could not be rescheduled. Raymond stared at the photograph, his face draining of color. I can explain. I do not want an explanation. Her voice remained calm, controlled. I want you to understand something. I have spent 6 weeks in this hospital watching our daughter fight for her life. I have learned every nurse's name. I have memorized every medication schedule. I have held her hand through every procedure and sat beside her bed through every long night. Margaret. And in all that time, you have been here for maybe 50 hours. You have spent more time volunteering with strangers on the cardiac unit than you have spent with your own family. The irony would be funny if it were not so devastating. Raymond sank into the chair beside Clara's bed. The same chair Margaret had occupied for 6 weeks. The chair he had barely touched. I do not know what to say. Neither do I. Margaret looked at her daughter, at the monitors that tracked every beat of her healing heart. But I know this. When Clara is strong enough to leave this hospital, I am taking her to my mother's house in Portland. And I am not coming back. The words hung in the air between them. Final. Irreversible. Raymond looked up at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Fear not of losing his reputation or his comfortable life, but of losing something he had taken for granted for so long that he had forgotten it required tending. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between Margaret and Clara, between the wife he was losing and the daughter he had barely begun to know. What about her? He finally asked. Clara, what am I supposed to do about her? That depends entirely on you. Margaret replied. You can be her father. A real father, not just a name on a birth certificate. You can show up for her in ways you never showed up for me. Or you can keep making excuses and missing moments until she is old enough to stop expecting anything from you at all. The choice is yours. But I will not be here to bridge the gap anymore. I will not make it easy for you to be absent. She turned away from him, walking to the window where the evening light was fading into dusk. Behind her, she heard the sounds of her husband breaking, the ragged breathing and the stifled sobs of a man confronting the consequences of his own choices. She did not turn around. She had spent too many years turning around, offering comfort, smoothing over difficulties. That part of her life was over. Through the window, she could see the city stretching out below them. Lights coming on in windows. People going about their ordinary lives. Somewhere out there was a future she could not yet imagine, a life that did not include the man sitting in the chair behind her. It was terrifying. It was also, in a way she was just beginning to understand, liberating. Clara stirred in her bed, making the small sounds of an infant waking from sleep. Margaret turned from the window to find her daughter's eyes open, looking around the room with the curious gaze of someone seeing everything for the first time. She moved to the bedside, reaching down to stroke Clara's cheek. The baby's face broke into a toothless smile at the sight of her mother. "Hi, sweetheart," Margaret whispered. "You did so good. You are so strong." Raymond watched from his chair, tears still wet on his cheeks, looking at the scene before him like a man realizing too late what he was about to lose. Margaret did not look at him. She did not need to. Whatever happened next between them, whatever form their separation took, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done waiting for him to become the man she needed. She was done making excuses for his absences. She was done being invisible in her own life. From now on, she would be visible, present, the center of her own story rather than a supporting character in his. And that, she was beginning to understand, was worth more than anything he could ever give her. The days following Clara's surgery passed in a blur of recovery and preparation. Margaret moved through them with a clarity she had not felt in years. Every decision seemed simpler now that she had stopped waiting for Raymond to become someone he was not. Every moment felt more present now that she was no longer splitting her attention between her daughter and her husband's absences. Clara grew stronger with each passing hour. Her vital signs stabilized. Her color improved. The monitors that had once seemed so frightening now told a story of healing, of a small heart learning to work the way it should. Raymond visited every day. This was new. In 6 weeks of Clara's hospitalization, he had never managed daily visits. Now he appeared each morning and stayed until evening, sitting in the chair beside Clara's bed, watching her with an intensity that might have moved Margaret if she had not already made her decision. He did not try to change her mind. Not directly. He did not argue or plead or make promises about how things would be different. He simply showed up, day after day, present in a way he had never been when it might have mattered. Margaret observed this change without comment. She did not know if it was genuine transformation or simply a more sophisticated form of performance. She did not know if he was becoming the man she had always wanted him to be, or if he was only becoming that man now because he was losing her. The distinction mattered, but she was no longer certain she cared enough to determine which was true. Ruth watched too, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had extended her stay indefinitely, canceling the obligations waiting for her in Portland, making herself available for whatever Margaret needed. Her presence was a constant reminder that not everyone left when things became difficult. That some people showed up and stayed. On the 3rd day after the surgery, Helen stopped Margaret in the corridor outside the NICU. "I need to tell you something." Helen's voice was low, confidential. "I probably should not be saying this, but I feel like you should know." Margaret waited, saying nothing. "Ray has been volunteering here for almost 20 years. I have seen him sit with hundreds of families through the worst moments of their lives. He is good at it. Genuinely good. But I always noticed something that bothered me." "What was that?" "He never stayed for the aftermath." Helen's eyes were kind but honest. He would be there for the crisis, for the surgery, for the immediate fear. But when the family went home, when the real work of recovery began, he would move on to the next crisis. The next family who needed him. Margaret absorbed this observation quietly. It confirmed what she had already begun to understand. "I think he learned how to be present for moments." Helen continued. "But not for the long haul. Not for the daily showing up that real relationships require." She paused. "I am not saying this to excuse him. What he has put you through is inexcusable. I am saying it because I think you deserve to understand who he is." "Thank you," Margaret said. "For telling me." Helen nodded. "For what it is worth, I think you are doing the right thing. Whatever that looks like for you." She continued down the corridor, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that she had already made the only choice she could make. The conversation Margaret had been avoiding happened on the 5th day after surgery. Raymond arrived that morning looking different than she had seen him in years. He was wearing casual clothes instead of his usual tailored suits. His face was unshaven, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had lost control of his carefully constructed world. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Somewhere private." They found an empty consultation room down the hall from the NICU. Raymond closed the door behind them and stood for a moment with his back to her, gathering himself. When he turned around, his eyes were red. "I ended it," he said. "Whatever you think was happening, it is over. It has been over since the night Clara was born." Margaret said nothing. She sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs and waited for him to continue. "Her name is Veronica. She works for a firm we were acquiring. It started 6 months ago. I told myself it was not serious. That it did not mean anything. That I still loved you and this was just—" He stopped, shaking his head. "There is no way to finish that sentence that does not make me sound like exactly what I am." "And what is that?" "A coward." He sank into the chair across from her. A man who was too afraid to face what was happening in his own marriage, so he found an escape instead. "Why were you afraid?" Raymond was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you wanted a baby. And I knew what could happen. I knew because I watched it happen to Daniel. I watched my parents destroy themselves trying to save him, and then destroy themselves again when they could not. And when you got pregnant, when we found out it was a girl, I thought maybe it would be okay. Maybe this time would be different." Margaret felt something shift in her chest. She had not expected this. Had not expected him to connect his absence to his grief, to the brother he had lost decades ago. But then she came early. Raymond continued. "And they told us about her heart. And it was the same thing, Margaret. The exact same condition that killed Daniel. And I could not." He broke off, his voice cracking. "I could not watch it happen again. I could not sit in those waiting rooms and hold your hand and pretend to be brave when I was terrified that we were going to lose her. So you left." "I ran," he admitted. "I ran to someone who did not know about Daniel. Who did not know about any of it. Someone I could pretend with." He looked up at her with devastated eyes. "It was the most selfish thing I have ever done. And I do not expect you to forgive me for it." Margaret sat with his words for a long moment. She understood now, in a way she had not before, what had driven him away. The fear that had paralyzed him. The grief that had never fully healed. But understanding was not the same as forgiving. And forgiving was not the same as staying. "I appreciate you telling me this," she said finally. I think I needed to understand why. Does it change anything? She considered the question carefully before answering. It helps me see that you were not trying to hurt me, that you were running from your own pain, not rejecting me or Clara. And that matters. It does. But you still ran. When I needed you most, when your daughter needed you most, you were not here. You were with someone else, hiding from the thing that terrified you instead of facing it with me. Raymond nodded slowly, accepting the truth of her words. I am not angry anymore. Margaret continued. I was. For weeks, I was furious with you. But now I just feel sad. Sad that we could not find our way through this together. Sad that your fear was bigger than your love for me. Sad that I spent so long waiting for you to become someone you were not able to be. I could become that person. He leaned forward, desperation entering his voice. I am already changing. I have been here every day. I am seeing a therapist. I ended things with Veronica completely. I will do whatever it takes. Maybe you will. Margaret said gently. Maybe you are already becoming the man I needed you to be. But Raymond, I cannot be the one to test that. I cannot spend the next 10 years of my life waiting to see if this time you will show up when it matters. So that is it. We are just over. We have been over for a long time. I was just too tired and too hopeful to admit it. She stood, moving toward the door. But that does not mean we are enemies. We have a daughter together. I want you to be her father. A real father, not just a name or a checkbook. How am I supposed to do that from 3,000 miles away? By showing up. Margaret opened the door. By calling when you say you will call. By visiting when you say you will visit. By being present for her in all the ways you were never present for me. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him. You know how to do it. I have watched you do it for other families for years. You sat with the Morrisons while Clara was in surgery. You held their hands and talked them through their fear. You were present for them in a way you never managed to be present for me. Margaret, all I am asking is that you give your daughter what you have been giving to strangers. That is not too much to ask, is it? She left without waiting for an answer. There was nothing more to say. Clara was discharged on a Tuesday morning, exactly 10 days after her surgery. The process took hours. Paperwork and medication schedules and follow-up appointments and emergency protocols. Margaret absorbed every detail with the fierce attention of a mother who had learned that her daughter's life depended on vigilance. Ruth handled the logistics of their departure, arranging for the car service and coordinating with the airlines and making sure their bags were packed and ready. She had become indispensable over the past weeks, a steady presence that asked nothing and gave everything. Raymond was there for the discharge. He carried Clara's car seat and helped load their bags and performed all the practical tasks that fathers were supposed to perform. He was gentle with Clara, careful with her still healing body, present in ways that seemed genuine even if they came too late. At the airport, he walked them as far as security would allow. The moment of goodbye arrived with the particular weight of an ending that could not be undone. Can I hold her? Raymond asked. One more time before you go. Margaret transferred Clara to his arms, watching as he cradled his daughter against his chest. Clara was awake, looking up at her father with the curious intensity of an infant discovering the world. I am going to miss you, Raymond whispered to the baby. I am going to miss you so much. Clara reached up with one tiny hand, grasping at his chin. He caught her fingers gently, pressing a kiss to her palm. I am going to be better. He continued, speaking to Clara but meaning the words for Margaret. I am going to learn how to be the father you deserve. I promise. He looked up at Margaret, tears streaming down his face. I know you do not believe me. And I know I have not earned the right to be believed. But I am going to prove it, however long it takes. Margaret took Clara back, settling her daughter against her shoulder. I hope you do, she said. For her sake, I really hope you do. And then she turned and walked through security, her mother beside her, her daughter in her arms, leaving behind the life she had built with Raymond Calloway. She did not look back. Portland in November was gray and rainy, The kind of weather that seeped into bones and made everything feel slightly damp. Margaret had always found it comforting, this gentle melancholy of her hometown. After the fluorescent brightness of the hospital, the soft gray light felt like permission to rest. Ruth's house was a modest craftsman in a quiet neighborhood, filled with the accumulated treasures of a lifetime. Photographs on every surface. Books stacked in corners. The particular warmth of a home that had been loved for decades. Margaret settled into her childhood bedroom with Clara's crib beside her bed. The room was smaller than she remembered, the walls still painted the pale blue she had chosen as a teenager. Everything felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a book she had read long ago and discovering it told a different story than she remembered. The first weeks were consumed by Clara's care. Medications administered on precise schedules. Vital signs monitored multiple times daily. Follow-up appointments with local cardiologists who reviewed her records and pronounced her recovery remarkable. "She is doing beautifully," Dr. Naomi Foster said at their first appointment. "Whatever you have been doing, keep doing it." Margaret did not mention the 6 weeks of sleepless nights. The constant vigilance. The terror that had become her constant companion. She simply nodded and scheduled the next appointment and continued doing what she had always done. Taking care of her daughter. Alone. Raymond called every day. At first, Margaret was skeptical. She remembered too many promises made and broken, too many assurances that had evaporated under the pressure of his real priorities. But the calls continued. Every morning at 7, before Clara's first feeding. Every evening at 6, during the quiet hour before bedtime. His voice on the phone became a strange constant, a connection she had not expected to maintain. He asked questions about Clara's development, her feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, whether she had smiled yet, really smiled, the kind of smile that meant recognition rather than reflex. He listened to Margaret's answers with an attention she had rarely received during their marriage. He remembered details from previous conversations and asked follow-up questions. He seemed genuinely to care. She did not know what to make of it. Did not know if this was the beginning of real change or simply another performance, more sophisticated than before. She decided, eventually, that it did not matter. Whatever his motivations, Clara was benefiting from her father's attention. That was enough. The divorce papers arrived in December. Margaret had been expecting them, had known they were coming, but the physical reality of the documents still took her breath away. 9 years of marriage reduced to legal language and signature blocks. The dissolution of everything they had built together, itemized and divided and assigned monetary value. Raymond had been generous. More than generous. The settlement provided for Clara's care indefinitely, established trust funds and education accounts, ensured that neither Margaret nor her daughter would ever want for anything material. Margaret read through the documents with her mother beside her, both of them noting the particulars of the arrangement. "He is giving you the house," Ruth observed. "The one in Connecticut." "I do not want it," Margaret said. "Too many memories." She signed the papers without requesting changes. Then she put them in an envelope, addressed it to the attorney whose name appeared on the letterhead, and walked to the corner mailbox. When she returned, Ruth was waiting with tea and the particular silence that meant she had something to say. "How do you feel?" Margaret considered the question. "Relieved," she said finally. "Like I have been holding my breath for 9 years and I can finally exhale." Ruth nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." They sat together as the winter darkness gathered outside. Clara slept in her bassinet nearby, her breathing steady and strong. The monitors that had once seemed so essential had been packed away. Her heart was healing. She did not need machines to tell Margaret what she already knew. "I think I am going to be okay," Margaret said. "Eventually." "Of course you are." Ruth reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You have always been stronger than you knew." Raymond's first visit came in January, 3 months after Margaret had left. He flew into Portland on a Friday evening, rented a car, and drove to Ruth's house through the rain. Margaret watched from the window as he parked on the street, sat for a moment in the driver's seat, then emerged carrying a shopping bag that undoubtedly contained gifts for Clara. He looked different. Thinner than before. Older somehow, though only months had passed. The confidence that had always defined him seemed muted, replaced by something more tentative, more human. Margaret opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, Raymond." "Hello, Margaret." He stood on the porch, rain dripping from his coat, looking uncertain in a way she had never seen from him. "Thank you for letting me come. She is your daughter. Of course I would let you come." She stepped aside to let him enter. Ruth had taken Clara to the living room, where a fire was burning in the old stone fireplace. The baby was awake, propped in her bouncy seat, watching the flames with the mesmerized attention of an infant discovering light and movement. Raymond stopped in the doorway of the living room, staring at his daughter. Clara was so much bigger than the last time he had seen her. So much more present. Her eyes tracked movement now. Her hands grasped at objects with intention. She was becoming a person rather than just a collection of needs. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She looks so different. She has grown a lot," Margaret said. "The doctors are pleased with her progress." He moved into the room slowly, kneeling beside Clara's seat with the careful reverence of someone approaching something sacred. Clara looked at him with curious eyes, not recognizing him but not frightened either. "Hi, sweetheart." Raymond's voice was thick with emotion. "It is Daddy. I know you do not remember me, but I am going to fix that. I promise." Clara responded by grabbing for his nose with surprising accuracy. Raymond laughed, a genuine sound that Margaret had not heard from him in years. "She has good aim," he said. "She has been practicing on me." Margaret replied. "My hair is her favorite target." Ruth excused herself to the kitchen, giving them privacy. Margaret settled into the armchair across from Raymond, watching as he played with Clara. He was good with her, she realized. Natural in a way she had not expected. The same gentle attention he had shown to strangers' children during his volunteer work, now directed at his own daughter. "How long are you staying?" she asked. "The weekend. I have to be back in New York on Monday for a board meeting." He looked up at her. "But I want to come more often. Every few weeks if you will allow it." "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you actually show up." Margaret kept her voice neutral, factual. "I am not going to promise Clara that her father is coming and then have to explain why he did not make it. If you say you will be here, you need to be here." "I will be here. We will see." It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. It was simply an opening, a chance for him to prove that his words meant something. Whether he would take that chance remained to be seen. The weekend passed quietly. Raymond stayed at a hotel in the city, coming to Ruth's house each morning and staying until evening. He held Clara and fed her and changed her and performed all the mundane tasks of parenting that Margaret had been doing alone for months. He was awkward at first, unsure of himself in a way that would have surprised anyone who knew him only from business contexts. But he learned quickly. By Sunday afternoon, he could settle Clara for a nap without help, could interpret her different cries and respond appropriately, could anticipate her needs before she expressed them. Margaret watched this transformation with mixed feelings. Part of her was glad. Her daughter deserved a father who was present and engaged. Another part of her was bitter. Where had this attentiveness been during their marriage? Why had it taken losing her to unlock this capacity for care? She did not share these thoughts with Raymond. There was no point. The past could not be changed. All that mattered now was the future, and whether he would show up for it. On Sunday evening, after Clara was asleep, Raymond and Margaret sat on Ruth's covered porch, watching the rain fall in the darkness. "I have been thinking," Raymond said quietly, "about what you told me at the hospital. About how I give to strangers what I could not give to you." Margaret waited, saying nothing. "You were right," he continued. "I have spent 20 years being present for other people's crises, learning how to sit with their fear, their grief, their uncertainty. But when it came to my own life, I ran. Every time. Why do you think that is?" He was quiet for a long moment, the rain filling the silence between them. "I think it is easier to care for strangers," he said finally. "Their pain is temporary. I can be there for the crisis and then move on. But with you, with Clara, the stakes are permanent. If I lose you, I lose you forever. That fear was too big. I did not know how to face it. So you faced other people's fear instead.
Yes.
He nodded slowly. I became very good at someone else's courage. But I never developed any of my own. Margaret absorbed this confession, feeling something soften in her chest despite herself. She had spent months angry at him, then months simply numb. Now, for the first time, she felt something like compassion. I am not telling you this to make excuses. Raymond continued. What I did was inexcusable. I abandoned you and Clara when you needed me most. I will never forgive myself for that, and I do not expect you to forgive me either. Then why are you telling me? Because I need you to know that I understand. What I did, why I did it. I am not hiding from it anymore. He turned to look at her, his expression raw and unguarded. And because I need you to know that I am trying to change. Not to win you back. I know that is not possible. But because Clara deserves a father who can face his own fear. And I am going to become that person, one way or another. Margaret looked at him, this man she had loved and lost and was now trying to understand. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine struggle of someone confronting their deepest failings. I believe you are trying, she said finally. I do not know yet if you will succeed. But I believe you are trying. It was not much. But it was something. Raymond left for New York the next morning. He hugged Clara carefully, kissing her forehead and whispering promises that Margaret hoped he would keep. He did not try to hug Margaret, did not make any gesture toward an intimacy that no longer existed between them. I will call tonight, he said from the doorway. And I will be back in 3 weeks. I already booked the flight. Good. He hesitated, as though wanting to say more. Then he simply nodded and walked to his rental car, drove away through the gray morning rain. Margaret closed the door and returned to her daughter, to the life they were building together, one day at a time. The winter passed slowly, measured in Clara's milestones and Raymond's visits. He came every 3 weeks, as promised. He called every day, as promised. He was present in a way he had never been during their marriage, attentive and engaged and genuinely interested in the small details of his daughter's life. Margaret found herself relaxing into this new arrangement, the tension she had carried for so long gradually easing. She had expected conflict and disappointment. Instead, she found a co-parent who showed up when he said he would, who listened when she spoke, who respected the boundaries she had established. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was a good life nonetheless. In February, she started looking for work. The gallery she had loved in Connecticut was thousands of miles away, but Portland had its own arts community. She reached out to old contacts, updated her resume, began the slow process of rebuilding a career that had been dormant for nearly a decade. In March, she found a part-time position at a small museum specializing in Pacific Northwest art. The hours were flexible enough to accommodate Clara's needs, the work engaging enough to remind her of the person she had been before Raymond, before marriage, before she had lost herself in the role of supportive wife. In April, Clara took her first steps. Margaret was filming on her phone, Ruth cheering from the couch, as Clara wobbled unsteadily across the living room floor. 3 steps, 4, 5, then a gentle tumble onto her bottom and a delighted laugh at her own accomplishment. She did it. Margaret was crying, the phone shaking in her trembling hands. She actually did it. That evening, she sent the video to Raymond. His response came within minutes. I cannot believe I missed it. But thank you for sending this. She is amazing. Just like her mother. Margaret read the message twice. Then she typed a response that surprised even herself. You will be here for the next milestone. And the one after that. We have time. The spring came slowly to Portland, the gray giving way to the tentative green of new growth. Margaret had been in her mother's house for 6 months now. Clara was thriving, her heart strong, her development on track. The cardiologist visits had decreased from weekly to monthly, the monitoring equipment packed away in closets, the emergency protocols memorized but rarely needed. She was beginning to imagine a future. A real future, not just survival from one day to the next. An apartment of her own, perhaps. A career that challenged her. A life that was full and meaningful, even without a partner. Raymond continued to visit, continued to call, continued to show up in all the ways he had never shown up before. His relationship with Clara was deepening, the baby now recognizing her father's face on video calls, reaching for him with excited arms when he appeared in person. Margaret watched this bond develop with something close to peace. Whatever Raymond's failures as a husband, he was becoming a good father. That was enough. That had to be enough. In May, 8 months after she had left Connecticut, the divorce was finalized. She received the notification by email, a simple confirmation that what had been was now officially over. She read it once, closed her laptop, and went to find Clara. The baby was in the backyard with Ruth, exploring the grass with the intense curiosity of a 1-year-old discovering the world. Margaret sat on the back steps, watching them, feeling the warmth of the spring sun on her face. "It is done," she said when Ruth looked up. "How do you feel?" Margaret considered the question. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel free." Ruth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That is exactly how you should feel." They sat together as Clara crawled through the grass, as birds sang in the old oak tree, as the life Margaret had feared would end began to unfold into something new. Raymond's next visit came 2 weeks later. He arrived on a Friday evening, as usual, but something about him was different. There was a nervousness in his manner that Margaret had not seen since the earliest days of their relationship, when he had been a young entrepreneur with nothing but ambition and ideas. "Can we talk?" he asked after Clara was asleep. "Just the two of us." They walked to the neighborhood park, the one Margaret remembered from her childhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They sat on a bench overlooking the playground, empty now in the evening hours. "I have been doing a lot of work," Raymond began, "with my therapist, about why I am the way I am. Why I ran when things got hard." Margaret waited, letting him find his words. "You know about Daniel, about what happened to him. But there is more that I never told you." He took a deep breath. "After Daniel died, my parents fell apart. They could not look at me without seeing him. They could not be in the same room without fighting. Within a year, they were divorced. I did not know that. I never talked about it." Raymond's voice was quiet, heavy with old pain. "I was 15 when they split up. I spent the next 3 years bouncing between their houses, watching them destroy themselves with guilt and grief. By the time I left for college, I had decided that love was not worth the risk, that caring too much only led to losing too much." Margaret absorbed this, understanding clicking into place. "So you learned to care at a distance," she said. "To be present for strangers whose pain could not touch you, but to run from anything that might actually hurt." "Exactly." He nodded. "I built my whole life around that fear. And then I met you, and for a while I thought maybe I had beaten it. That loving you was safe because nothing bad would happen." He paused. "But then we got pregnant. And then Clara was born with the same condition that killed Daniel. And every fear I had ever buried came rushing back. And you ran. And I ran. To someone who did not know any of it. To a situation where I could pretend to be someone without all that history." He turned to look at her directly. "It was the most cowardly thing I have ever done. And I am so sorry." Margaret looked at him, this man she had married and divorced, the father of her daughter, the source of so much pain and now, perhaps, the beginning of understanding. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I needed you to know. Not so you would take me back. I know that is not going to happen. But because you deserve to understand. All of it. Not just the betrayal, but the broken things inside me that made it possible." They sat in silence as the sun continued to set. The playground shadows lengthened across the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "I am glad you told me," Margaret said finally. "It helps me understand. Not just what happened, but who you are. Who I was." Raymond corrected. "I am trying to become someone different." "I know you are." She turned to face him. "And I see it, Raymond. The changes you have made. The way you show up for Clara now. It is real. But it does not change what happened between us. It does not rebuild what was broken. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I care about you. I will always care about you. We share a daughter, and that connects us forever. But I am not in love with you anymore. That part of me closed, and I do not think it will open again. Raymond nodded slowly, accepting what she was saying. I understand. And I am not asking for that. I just wanted you to know the truth. All of it. No more secrets. No more secrets. Margaret agreed. They walked back to Ruth's house in comfortable silence. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of two people who had been through something together and come out the other side. Changed, but still connected. At the door, Raymond paused. Thank you, he said, for listening. For letting me be in Clara's life despite everything. She is your daughter. Margaret replied. She needs her father. And you are becoming a good one. It was the kindest thing she had said to him since leaving. Raymond's eyes glistened, but he did not cry. He simply nodded and walked to his car, driving away through the gathering darkness. Margaret went inside to check on Clara, to continue building the life they had made together. 1 year after leaving Connecticut, Margaret stood in the kitchen of her own apartment, watching the Portland rain and thinking about how much had changed. She had moved out of Ruth's house 3 months ago, into a small 2-bedroom in a neighborhood filled with young families. The apartment was nothing special, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every mug in the cabinet was something she had chosen for herself. Clara was walking confidently now, chattering in the mixture of words and sounds that passed for language at 18 months. She had her father's determination and her mother's eyes. She was healthy and happy and curious about everything. Margaret had been promoted at the museum, was now curating small exhibits rather than just assisting with them. The work challenged her in ways she had forgotten she could be challenged. She was becoming someone again. Not just a mother, not just an ex-wife. A person with her own identity and her own purpose. Raymond visited every 2 weeks now, more frequently than before. His relationship with Clara was deep and genuine, the bond between father and daughter growing stronger with each visit. He had stopped volunteering at the hospital in New York, had instead started a foundation in Daniel's name to fund research into pediatric cardiac conditions. A way of honoring his brother that did not require him to hide from his own grief. He was different. Genuinely different. Not the man Margaret had married, but someone new. Someone who had faced his fears and come out the other side. She was proud of him, in a way. Not as a wife. Not as a partner. But as the mother of his child, as someone who wanted him to be well. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Raymond standing in the hallway, Clara's weekend bag slung over his shoulder. "Ready for our adventure?" he asked, grinning. Clara came running from her bedroom, arms outstretched. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." Raymond scooped her up, swinging her in a circle while she squealed with delight. Margaret watched them with a smile that felt easy and unforced. "What is the plan for today?" she asked. "I thought we would go to the Children's Museum. Then maybe the park for a picnic." He looked at her over Clara's head. "Unless you have other ideas." "That sounds perfect." She handed him Clara's jacket. "There are snacks in her bag. And she might need a nap around 2. "Got it." He was competent now. Confident in his role as a father. It had taken time and practice and a lot of mistakes, but he had gotten there. "I will pick her up at 6. Margaret said. "Actually." Raymond hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something. There is a dinner tonight. A fundraiser for the foundation. Nothing fancy, but some of the donors want to meet Clara. I thought maybe she could stay with me overnight. If that is okay with you." Margaret considered the request. A year ago, she would have refused automatically. Would not have trusted him to handle a full night alone with their daughter. But things were different now. "That should be fine," she said. "I will pack an overnight bag." "Thank you." His voice carried genuine gratitude. "I know I have not earned." "You have earned it." She interrupted. You have been showing up, Raymond. Every time you said you would. That is what earned it. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. I am trying to be the person I should have been all along. I know you are. And Clara knows it too. He left with their daughter in his arms, Clara waving goodbye over his shoulder. Margaret closed the door and stood for a moment in the quiet of her apartment, feeling the strange peace that had become her baseline. She was not waiting for anything anymore. Not hoping for rescue or reconciliation or any of the things she used to think she needed. She was simply living her life, one day at a time. And that, she was discovering, was more than enough. 2 years after leaving Connecticut, Margaret sat across from Raymond at a coffee shop near her apartment. They met like this occasionally now. Not as a couple, not as romantic partners, but as co-parents navigating the complexities of raising a child across 2 households. They had developed an ease with each other that would have seemed impossible in those dark days at the hospital. She is doing so well, Raymond said, looking at pictures of Clara on his phone from the previous weekend. Her teacher says she is one of the most emotionally intelligent kids in the class. She gets that from you, Margaret said. Raymond looked up, surprised. From me? Yes. She smiled. You have always been good at reading people, at understanding what they need. You just had to learn how to use that skill at home instead of just at work or at the hospital. He absorbed this observation quietly. I still volunteer sometimes, he said. Not at the hospital, at the foundation. Talking to families whose children have the same condition Daniel had. The same condition Clara has. That must be hard. It is. He nodded. But it is different now. Before, I was hiding from my own pain by focusing on theirs. Now I am using my experience to help them. It feels more honest. Margaret reached across the table to touch his hand briefly. I am proud of you, she said. I do not say that often enough. But I am proud of the person you have become. Raymond's eyes glistened, but he did not look away. That means more than you know, he said quietly. Coming from you. They finished their coffee and parted ways, Raymond heading to the airport for his flight back to New York, Margaret walking home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and the betrayal and the long, slow work of rebuilding. The daughter they shared who had somehow become the bridge between them, connecting them even as they built separate lives. It was not the ending she had imagined when she married Raymond Calloway. Not the happily ever after that she had believed in during those early years of hope and possibility. But it was something real. Something honest. Something built on truth rather than illusion. And that, she had learned, was worth more than any fairy tale. Clara Calloway would grow up knowing she was loved. She would learn this not from words alone, but from the steady presence of 2 parents who had figured out how to put her needs first. From a mother who had found the courage to leave a marriage that was not working. From a father who had done the hard work of becoming someone worthy of her trust. She would learn that families could take many forms. That love was not about perfection but about showing up. That the people who mattered most were the ones who kept trying, even when trying was hard. She would learn, eventually, about the brother her father had lost. About the grief that had shaped him. About the journey he had taken to become the father she knew. And she would understand, in a way that children of intact families sometimes did not, that love was a choice made every single day. A commitment renewed in small moments and large ones. A decision to be present, to be honest, to be brave. Margaret had taught her this. Not through lectures or lessons, but through the simple act of living it. And Raymond, despite all his failures, was teaching her the same thing. Showing her that people could change. That mistakes could be learned from. That it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. On Clara's 5th birthday, both her parents were present. The party was small, held in Margaret's apartment with a handful of Clara's friends from preschool. Ruth had come from across town. Raymond had flown in from New York. There were balloons and cake and the particular chaos of 5-year-olds hopped up on sugar. After the guests had left and Clara had been put to bed clutching her new stuffed elephant, the 3 adults sat in Margaret's living room, tired but content. That was quite a party, Ruth observed. I had forgotten how exhausting children can be. She is only going to get more energetic. Margaret said. I am already dreading the teenage years. I will help. Raymond said quietly. With whatever you need. Whatever stage she is in. Margaret looked at him, seeing the man he had become rather than the man he had been. I know you will. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Three people connected by a child they all loved, finding their way forward together despite everything that had come before. When Raymond left to return to his hotel, he paused at the door. Thank you, he said, for this. For letting me be part of it. You earned it. Margaret replied. Every time you showed up when you said you would. Every call you made. Every promise you kept. You earned your place in her life. And in yours. The question hung in the air between them. Margaret considered it carefully before answering. We will always be connected, she said. Clara makes sure of that. But more than that, I think we have become something like friends. Is that strange? Raymond shook his head slowly. It is not strange. It is exactly what I hoped for. Not what I wanted, maybe. But what I hoped we could build from the wreckage. Then we built it. He nodded, a smile touching his lips. Yeah. He agreed. We built it. He left, and Margaret closed the door behind him. She checked on Clara one more time, finding her daughter sleeping peacefully, the stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. Sweet dreams, sweetheart, Margaret whispered, pressing a kiss to Clara's forehead. You are so loved. Never forget that. She went to her own room, to the bed that was hers alone, to the life she had created from nothing. And she slept well, dreaming of futures that no longer frightened her. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption to your screen. And if you have ever had to find the courage to walk away from something that was not working, we would love to hear your story in the comments below. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you know. You deserve to be loved well. And it is never too late to start again.